you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Can I know where the timekeeper is? Can you give me another sound? Ladies and gentlemen, what we're debating today is not the potential value of civil disobedience. It's not what civil disobedience has achieved in the past. It's about what value civil disobedience holds to the common man today, and what impression it strikes in the minds of the common man as to what the term civil disobedience stands for. Because when you talk about the term civil disobedience and how it was used as an instrument to fight despotism, you can link it back to the days when Gandhi used this move to protest against the despotism that was inflicted by the colonial rule. It stood for two fundamental hallmarks. It stood for high ethical standards by the people who focused or used the instrument of civil disobedience, and it focused additionally on enforcing a discourse on the sanctity of democratic structures and what a common man can do within that democratic structure to express himself and to convey dissent. We think that the situation today has changed, both in terms of these parameters. We think the ethical standards followed when people take up civil disobedience, as well as the nature of what people do when they involve in these movements has fundamentally altered. I'm going to talk about three basic ideas. I'm going to explain to you through examples on how the current movements have shaped the impression of these movements. Second, I'm going to show you the consequences of how a person draws association of what a civil disobedience movement entails. And last, I'm going to explain to you why this damage has been permanent. Because when you look at the kind of civil disobedience movements that have so purportedly taken place today in India, it brings to mind two basic events, right? The first one was this Anna Hazare-led movement against corruption, and the second one was the huge hysteria surrounding the Delhi gang rape case. What we saw particularly in both these cases was the kind of demagoguery or the kind of politically vested and motivated nature of protests that took place. And this is what he did, right? Anna Hazare exploited the plank of a crisis taking place in India to force the government and hijack it through the unethical means of an undemocratic hunger strike, where he threw an ultimatum on the government that I will give you 7 days to accept the Jan Lokpal bill. He additionally said that if you do not do this, then I as a political figure will fasten to death and there will be lot of anarchy, right? We think this was the problem because the motivation behind the civil disobedience movement was itself predicated on self-interest. You saw Baba Ramdev come forward and explain that this is not about corruption only, but he did weird things, like for instance, expound theories about yoga and breathing exercises for people and how they can benefit for it and bring together people, because he wanted to become a political figure. He wanted to become the demagogue that led the people to delivery and change. Sit down. We also think that when Anna Hazare came out and talked about things like anti-corruption, it was largely about his own sacrifices and focused around his past accomplishments in his life, and everything about the movement seemed to be focused on the leader of the movement as opposed to the objective of the movement. We think this is fundamentally different from the kind of principle Gandhi followed, because let's understand the context within which Gandhi's civil disobedience movement took place. It took place when there was a huge amount of despotism which did not follow democratic structures to administer the people and grant them political agency in India. We think currently the people who lead these movements do not fight against despotism. They fight against the sanctity of the democratic structure and have a misplaced understanding of the fact that it's the democratic structure that are responsible for this. And this is highly politically motivated because the kind of ends they want to achieve is not to, for instance, reform the individual himself in the way he behaves in society, but to take down the government that is that's currently holding power and show that the current government has failed the state. It's extremely destructive in the way that it doesn't enable any form of engagement on what can be done or what the individual can do, but singularly focuses on the fact that because the government has failed, because the benefits have not been conferred on the people, automatically the democracy is at fault, and more importantly, automatically the government is at fault, right? We think this is an exploitation of the faith people have in democracy. What was the consequence of this? Because they conflated things like hunger strikes and resort to undemocratic means with the idea that the government has failed the trust of the people within these democratic structures. Because they never came out and said that next time when elections happen, you should go out and cast your vote after an informed decision. It did say, for instance, that you should stop bribing people at the ticket counters in the railway office or stop bribing people every time you want a service to be expedient, right? It focused only on the movement itself and made a hysteria about it without focusing or initiating any discourse on the objective of the movement itself. And they took away the sanctity of the instrument of civil disobedience and the potential that it could have achieved for the people in terms of the fact that it is a means of expression of dissent. It became extremely egotist and it glorified at the instance when people were attacked by the police to disperse the crowd and Baba Ramdev first had to dress up as a woman and then eventually ran away. Because this is all about the movement itself. Anna Hazare was asked to support the Aam Aadmi Party and he refused to do it because he didn't see any political end or self-motivated end towards supporting that party. Yes.
Okay, so is your case statement that the status quo is not working or that civil disobedience cannot work?
We're not saying civil disobedience in some form of utopian platform cannot work. We're saying that currently we're debating the specific connotation people draw when people resort to civil disobedience movements that gather media spotlight. The first thing that hits their mind and the kind of resentment they face where it pushes away the common people from sympathizing with these moves because they think that the moves have now been permanently exploited to achieve political ends that do not necessarily deal with the benefits towards the common man. Now this leads me to my second argument, right? What is the correlation a common man today draws in India whenever a civil disobedience movement happens? Because let's look at one thing, right? When the Delhi gang rape happened, the kind of demands that came out were in terms of initiate chemical castration against the perpetrators of rape, hang them within 7 days, try them in public and make sure that they're not let away. It completely opposed all democratic means of fair process of law and transparency in these procedures. It completely did not support the fact that the discourse should focus on constructive ways to reform the way people behave in society, to counter the patriarchal notions that fuel these people and push them to commit these rapes in the first place. The fact that there are certain simple policy measures that have been completely absent within the state administrative setup. It misplaced the reforms and it most importantly pushed away the key stakeholders that a civil disobedience movement has. The fact that it allows the common man to work within a democratic setup and democratically demand certain ends. Right? It robbed it of the sanctity. And most importantly, look at the other thing that happened, right? Because then people involved in the civil disobedience movement, what did they do? They held placards, they lit candles, but more importantly, they hurt third parties by blocking roads, by blocking public services, by destroying government property, by burning buses, and at the same time blocking roads just because they felt they wanted to convey a message to the government. None of this was democratically followed and completely destroyed the notion that people in a democracy must resort to democratic alternatives to maintain the sanctity of the setup itself. It became more of an oppositionist stance against the political parties and became an opportunistic plan for these people to capitalize on the pain of the people and temporarily utilize their trust for their own political ends. And we think that this damage is permanent. Because today, every time we see on TV that there are people going on a gang rape protest, or for that matter, protesting about human rights or women's rights, they don't think the movement is going to achieve anything. And this weekends parallel movements which might have legitimate basis. Because today, people are so disenchanted by the process of civil disobedience and the consequent harms that it entails, that people do not have any trust in the instrumentality of the civil disobedience movement. They think that anything to do with a civil disobedience movement necessarily implies destroying democratic structures, and the moment it seems to work and it produces consequences like it did in the rape case, they think that the consequences are the result protected. They said that the result or the consequences are because following of the undemocratic means, something Gandhi staunchly opposed. We tell you that the very basis of a civil disobedience movement was to democratically oppose despotism. But what it has become today is to despotically oppose democracy. For these reasons, we beg to propose.
I'm just testing. Can everyone hear me clearly? Adjudicators, you guys can hear? Okay. So, is everyone ready? I'm beginning. Right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I was highly confused by the stance given by Shaunak Sarkar, and that's not my fault. It's because they provided you a bizarre stance where what they're saying is that because two particular movements, and I'm not even exaggerating this, they've talked about two movements, and he's highlighted his perceived grievances with those movements and claimed that as a result of that, one can conclude that as a blanket policy, it's impossible to implement civil disobedience properly. That's ridiculous. We will be telling you, firstly, how civil disobedience can work. So I'll give you an example of something that can work, assuming people do feel strongly about it. I'm also going to be telling you at length why people do actually feel strongly about what's going on, right? And secondly, I'm going to talk about how it's better than what they've proposed for the simple reason that they don't have any alternative to the numerous problems that are plaguing the system, right? But first let's understand what they're saying, okay? Shaunak has this bizarre stance where he's saying that civil disobedience is interfering with democracy because it's like hijacking the democratic process. Now, until you understand what is resulting from this democratic process, you can't realize how silly this claim is. Because the democratic process has been completely hijacked by bureaucrats, by politicians who are acting for their own ends. We're not saying all politicians are bad. But what we're saying is that the way the government is working is not at all in the interest of the people, and this is best exemplified by the reactions of people and complaints to things like corruption, which is rampant. It's not like only those people are disaffected when they see these protests taking place. Maybe Shaunak Sarkar didn't like it when he saw these protests, on TV. But I can tell you that loads of people are very happy at the fact that somebody is standing up to the government and what they are doing. Now, it might be that you don't agree with the particular man who stood up or the particular way he did it. That doesn't mean that people aren't unhappy with the government, because there's rampant corruption. There's a problem of rampant corruption. There's a problem of vote buying. There are problems where laws are almost never enforced against people who are in positions of political or bureaucratic power. So to say that there's no problem is ridiculous, and they have no solution. They have no solution whatsoever. So if we manage to prove that civil disobedience could solve some of these problems or any of these problems to some extent, obviously it still retains some of its value. But let's look specifically at what they said. Okay, they said that the democratic fair process has been hijacked by these movements. No. And that's how civil disobedience was according to them. Gandhi saying that you should follow the democratic process. This is ridiculous because there was no democratic process in that time. The democracy of the majority was people who are breaking laws. So what we are suggesting is the breaking of laws which are no longer democratic in the sense that they do not at all reflect what the majority of people want, desire or need. Right? You cannot tell me that the majority in India want people to be starving, like on the streets in villages, people are starving, food is rotting in godowns, while people who are super rich can buy 32 cars and they go with their 3 or 4 bodyguards in the cities, and when they are drunk and when they run over somebody on the streets, somebody else will either take the fall for it or there will be no prosecution. So you cannot tell me that this is the state of affairs that the majority of people want. It's clearly not. That's why there are all these protests. That's why people turn up. No, right? Now, what are the kinds of protests which can work, for instance? And just because these movements didn't work or did not gather critical momentum or were hijacked by some political elements, does not mean that every movement of this character will. So we tell you that, for example, if everybody believes tomorrow that corruption is a huge problem, that all government expenditure is essentially corrupt, that it's being eaten up by middlemen, we tell you that everybody who believes this honestly could, for example, decide not to pay their taxes. Right? It's a very simple measure. So until this government changes things, until this government makes changes, they could decide not to pay a single rupee of tax. And believe me, first of all, this does not require any violence. Anybody who wanted to opt into this could do so. Furthermore, this would be enormously effective because unlike a public protest, and by the way, these movements did not work to a certain extent because they were repressed with extreme violence. So unlike Shaunak Sarkar, who wasn't at the Delhi gangway protest, my partner Ashay was, and he saw police battalions ruthlessly lathi charging people who are doing nothing whatsoever. So the advantage of what we are proposing over this is that, for instance, it cannot be you cannot go to every single house of every single person over India. And believe me, there are millions and millions of people who have a problem with the way the government is functioning. And by the way, by government, I don't necessarily mean the Congress. I mean whether it's the Congress or BJP or Telugu Desam Party or whatever else it might be. Many people have a problem with the way political parties are functioning across the board and the way the process is functioning. And if people were to protest against this, believe me that there are millions and millions of people in India who have problems with this, and it would not be possible to lathi charge or stop any of them. Right?
Are you still in favor of stopping to pay taxes for means or ends that aren't democratic? For instance, having chemical castration or removing a political party because Anna Hazare demands it.
Look, Shaunak, I don't think you understand what democratic means, because there's nothing about chemical castration that is inherently incompatible with a democracy. Like chemical castration, or for that matter, even a really extreme punishment like hanging and drawing and quartering could also be compatible with democracy if the majority of people wanted it and if the crime actually warranted it. So there's nothing inherently undemocratic about this.
So-
And certainly removing a political party is not undemocratic by any stretch. In fact, that's the point of a democracy, which is to remove political parties which are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it's amazing that they're defending this status quo in this particular debate, because they haven't told you anything about why this status quo is acceptable. They haven't told you anything about what they're doing to improve it or what could possibly be done. They said work within the democratic process. Okay, I'm going to challenge Shaunak or any of them to give you any credible method of working within the democratic process. Vote, there is rampant
On
vote
that-
buying. It is impossible to get onto a political ticket. There are huge amounts of lobbies in pretty much every political race. So it's impossible for people to change the way the political structure operates as a result of collective action problem. What this means is, even if I decided to set up my rebel party, which is like to only help the poor people in India, that could easily be hijacked by people who could just join that party and subvert my intentions. People who could instigate violence against that. Compare that with civil disobedience, which is to disobey the laws and the machinery of the government, which is to say you run the government and its machinery because I am paying with you, because I am cooperating with your structure. And if I refuse to cooperate with that structure, if I refuse to pay you taxes, you don't have the money to pay policemen to beat me up. You do not have the money to oppress me. You do not have the money for your Ferraris and BMWs and for the ability to just leave India whenever you're charged with anything, and on the few occasions when an investigative agency can actually nail you. So that is what actually deals with these sorts of problems. We have presented you with a template for dealing with this kind of problem. Now, I just gave you one idea, but this is not the be all and end all of civil disobedience. There's several ways you can disobey laws. The point is that laws are a structure which depend upon the compliance of its people. Even if that's just the compliance of policemen within the state. When people refuse to accept those laws of the government, when people believe that the government, and by this I mean the governmental structure and process whereby certain parties or certain elite interests are monopolizing the structure, so that the structure no longer reflects what the majority of people want. This is basically a collective action problem where people have been manipulated into a situation where they cannot exercise their rights because voting cannot actually get them a fair, honest leader. That's the problem. We are telling you that civil disobedience offers hope, because if you refuse to comply with the structure, if you opt out of the entire system while not resorting to violence, we think you can solve the problems far better than you can within their structure, because they didn't suggest a single method to solve rapes. They did not suggest a single method to solve corruption. They just said work within the democratic process. We have all seen what the democratic process has done to us. So for them to have any chance of competing in this debate, they need to tell us how exactly you work within this process when the process is the problem. We are very proud to oppose.
Who's chair? Mr. Speaker, Baba says that this debate is about us proposing ways in which that the people should politically address the issues. We don't think it's that at all. We think what the motion demands of us is to analyze the value of these movements and the impact of these movements on India as a country and on the and on democracy in this country. We think the biggest problem is exactly what Baba posits and what Baba believes. And Baba, unfortunately, is a victim of the prominence of such movements in India. What does he believe? He believes that the state is always wrong, that politicians are always bad, nothing can be done about it. He says it's impossible to change the system because there's a lack of collective action. Yet we saw throngs of people coming to Ramlila Maidan and coming to all those other places, but those are the same people who refuse to vote in elections because it's too inconvenient.
We say the problem today is that these movements are further reinforcing this belief that the democratic system cannot be reformed, and the only way that you can address yourself to state is to submit to the demagoguery of unaccountable leaders like Anna Hazare, Baba Ramdev, and so on and so forth, without addressing political issues, without voting. We think there are two horrible consequences to democracy because of this. One is his appeal to demagoguery and how people are willing to listen to this one leader and believe he's infallible. Second is that it promotes a culture of slacktivism, and I'm going to talk more about that, and a severe lack of introspection of society and engagement with the government, because all these movements believe the government is at fault for all their wrongs and not themselves. But before I go on to these two arguments, let's talk about some of the arguments that Baba made. He said, why are we talking only about these two movements and civil disobedience in general? Because we say civil disobedience is really, really hard to define within strict parameters, saying it will only ever happen this way. But what we do think is important is something that Baba said himself, that loads of people are extremely happy with the manner in which these movements have been conducted. We think that that is a validation of these movements, and which is why we're talking about the two biggest movements in this debate. And if we can prove to you that the means by which these two movements have addressed their objectives, we win this debate. We don't think we need to suggest an alternative. We think that the alternative is not to use civil disobedience and all these problems that are there. We think we can have another debate with Baba, hopefully at next year's NUJs, where Baba will still come, and we can have that then.
On this one, sir?
No. On the argument of chemical castration, which is just a caveat I just want to get done with. He says our problem with chemical castration is that it's undemocratic. It's not the idea of chemical castration isn't undemocratic. But the problem is the way in which people came to the conclusion was without any engagement, any discourse. People didn't talk about the merits and demerits of it. All they did was go to Janpath and protested and held placards without really talking about it. And it's something these movements encourage, that is a lack of introspection and cogitation of the issues themselves. No, I'd say you should stand up for POIs. More importantly, we say that there are two major harms that are coming from this, and this is really, really important. The culture of slacktivism that this is promoting. What do I mean by slacktivism? And I mean this especially in the context of the middle class, which is growing and burgeoning in India. The middle class believes that it's the way to politically represent themselves is to go to the streets and stop the works of the public and not to vote in elections. And these movements reinforce that. They also believe it's enough if you like posts on Facebook which say women shouldn't be raped, which says corruption is bad, and retweet these tweets about Anna Hazare saying he's infallible and what a great man, without really doing anything about them or without really talking about it. What we say this does is that it skirts the real issue. We believe these issues are extremely complex, like Shaunak pointed out to you with regards to corruption. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we say that these movements promote a lack of debate and discourse on these issues and just believe what the demagogues say. And we think it's unsustainable and harmful in the long run. We say it's become more about being present at these movements, but not knowing what these movements are about or about the objectives they address. Sid, we think there are two issues especially we highlight through these movements. One is the idea of corruption and how none of these movements ever ask the people to introspect about the things they do in daily life, and only only said that the politicians are bad, politicians will always be bad, politicians will always be corrupt. Which is also why Anna Hazare refused to support the Aam Aadmi Party, although they were asking for the same objectives, but they were following democratic means. We support the Aam Aadmi today and not Anna Hazare. We think what this does is that the middle class believes it's exercised its political obligation and it's done what is enough and it's no longer important to vote. They believe that it's enough that you demand from the government because you're beyond reproach, because you're not political and the tag of political is somehow bad. We say, moreover, what this does in the longer run is that it hurts democracy and discourse, where people will be unwilling even in the future to engage with the system in democratic means by going to vote and talking about issues, which we think is very harmful. Yes.
Okay, Karthik, on what basis have you concluded that these people are not voting or not encouraging discourse other than possibly the fact that you yourself don't?
It's really simple. It's about what these movements have asked for. Anna Hazare has never ever said you should go and vote. You should examine yourself for the things that you do. And we think that's fair to go, and we think it's a fair conclusion to come to, because so many people are coming to this and they believe whatever he says because they refuse to question whatever, or refuse to question the moves he puts it in. Like for example, when he asked for the Jan Lokpal bill, which in itself was badly drafted, but they're never open to discourse and debate on that. They demanded that the government pass it in 7 days, or he kills it, or that Anna Hazare will kill himself. What this does is that it fuels his ego and says that Anna Hazare is beyond reproach, he's always good. The same thing happened with Baba Ramdev when he assembled people in Ram Leela Maidan and didn't talk about corruption, but told them to do breathing exercises and promoted his own yoga quackery. We think all these movements become about the egotists and not the issue themselves, and we think it's much more harmful in the long run. We don't care what civil disobedience can be about, and we don't care that Gandhi did it, which is also a huge problem because that's the constant association in India, that Gandhi did it, so it must be right. And it translates to comparing Anna Hazare to be a Gandhian just because he goes on a hunger strike and wears the Anna cap. And we say it's become extremely superficial, the ideas of these movements. We think it's especially harmful because in the long run, we don't think such acts are sustainable. We don't think it's sustainable for you to ask reform in a democracy as opposed to Gandhi who asked for reform in a despotic state. We say that in a democracy, it's unsustainable to go to the streets and create a nuisance and ask the government to submit because you're the middle class and you have a demagogue who's infallible. We say it's hurtful in the longer run. We say it hurts democratic structures to such a level whereby it stops any democratic involvement. And we say, as long as India is a democracy, unless Baba is suggesting a radical rewrite of the constitution itself, we need to address these problems in democratic means. Or at least that these civil disobedience movements don't hurt us hurting democratic means or them taking democratic measures. We beg to propose.
Ladies and gentlemen, what they've come out and told us here today is that civil disobedience doesn't have any value in current society and their alternative to it is following the democratic process. We have come out and told you today that the democratic process often comes to an impasse with the interest of the society, and that's what we have a problem with. Sometimes it comes to a situation when neither the BJP or the Congress will enact the Jan Lokpal bill because both will lose their personal private Swiss accounts because as a result of enacting these particular laws. We tell you then what is the recourse that the individual has in the course of either those 5 years in which the government can choose to be uncheckably tyrannical, or from every 5 year to 5 year when each coming government doesn't enact that particular law because it goes against the individual interests of those people who are running the state machinery. So we tell you that under those circumstances, so this is today our particular standard for evaluating whether or not civil disobedience has a value in society. Two things. First of all, effectiveness, and second of all, what are the alternatives, right? Because let's think about this. In the absence of civil disobedience as a binding idea amongst the masses of India, we would have become not much better than what Pakistan has ended up with, right? Because in the absence of civil disobedience, when your vote doesn't count for anything, when vote after vote after vote, the government continues to screw you over, what you're left with is the recourse of violence. And let's see how that pans out, right? Because when people do reach the level of frustration where they have no voice, no means of pressuring the government or holding it accountable, the people resort to violence and destroy our state machinery. But the problem is that the idea of India as a state hasn't failed. The constitution still remains sacrosanct. What has failed is the people who are a part of the state machinery, our legislators, our enforcers, the executive and all of this. So destroying the state like the Maoists did because of the failure of these particular individuals doesn't make any sense. So this civil disobedience gives you a means to pressure the government without destroying the state in itself, which ensures you all your particular rights. But let's come down to their case, right? Let's understand this. They gave us today two particular examples of civil disobedience movements in the recent past. Let's analyze how they panned out. Their problem was with the Anna Hazare movement was the legitimacy of Anna Hazare. We have one movement that is faceless, that is the Delhi gang rape movement that happened, and so all the arguments for Anna Hazare don't hold over there. It was a faceless movement, nobody was motivating them, nobody's political gains came out of it. The only problem they had with it is that people proposed castration. Baba came out and clearly told you there is nothing wrong in a society deciding that a gang rape as heinous as that deserves castration. It's perfectly democratic. There was no one person in India who came out and told people that you should propose castration. It was a mass epiphany where people realized that the only response to something as heinous is castration, and people all over the country asked for it, right? But let's understand why civil disobedience is good, because there is an opt-out in this particular situation for people who do not agree with it, right? So when somebody didn't agree with Anna Hazare, like Kejriwal, he had the option of opting out of his movement, like something that a violent movement can never give you an opt-out option of, because kids being born in Maoist areas have no option of opting out of that particular violent revolution. So they ask us, how do you prove the value? We tell you this. In a society where your only recourse is either violence or pertaining or going on voting for a system that doesn't work, you are left with civil disobedience. So if we can prove to you today that the alternatives of civil disobedience are much worse than what we have with civil disobedience has an inherent value. Before that, your point.
Alright, why do you have to protest at India Gate and stop like an ambulance that's trying to go to the hospital? Why can't you just protest at Jantar Mantar, which is designed for protest?
Yes, sir. Because when people went to Jantar Mantar filled out. The government conveniently chose to trivialize the issue and ignore it. This is what we tell you happens when people sit at their homes and discuss about issues but don't raise it and hold the government accountable or pressure the government, right? Because the problem is that what they're talking about, why do you need to come to India Gate? Why not just Jantar Mantar? Because when people conform with the law, the government gets complacent and feels completely comfortable ignoring you, as has been happening with Lokpal. People have been talking about Lokpal for 20 years and it hasn't been passed, right? So obviously Jantar Mantar didn't work out. What you need to do then is march on the Rashtrapati Bhavan, something I did, and I got beaten up mercilessly by police officials over there, which was caught on camera and then exposed the nature of the government in place, right? The beauty of this particular system is that it pressures the government without actually it cripples it without actually destroying the state and the state of rights that go along with it, right? We're telling you that this is a tool for pressurizing and forcing the government into a confrontation where they have to account for their particular actions, and this gives the right leverage to the masses, right? But coming back to this entire issue of Anna Hazare, so these are his problems with Anna Hazare. One, they come out and tell you that Anna Hazare isn't a credible or a legitimate person. First of all, let's understand this, that the legitimacy of Anna Hazare is completely irrelevant to the issue, right? Because starting off with Mahatma Gandhi, nobody knew what the legitimacy of Mahatma Gandhi was. The only reason people tagged along was because of the fact that he represented something that all of them felt, right? Movements need a figurehead at times, and these people are just symbolic and have no real value behind them. Because at the end of the day, if Anna Hazare comes and tells everyone to do something that they don't collectively believe in, they will opt out of his movement anyways, so that doesn't hold. He cannot coerce them into doing anything that they would naturally not be inclined to do. Secondly, on the top of this Lokpal bill that he was forcing them to pass in 7 days, let's understand why even this 7-day thing was a legitimate outcome of this particular civil disobedience movement. Because for 20 years when a government hasn't been passing it, and every time you tell them to pass the law, they keep saying, we give us 2 months, next session 6 months, another year, 1 month, or the next government 5 years. All you're left to do is give them a tangible deadline. That could have been 7 months, 20 days or 30 days, but that pressure was necessary to get the government to act and push it out of its lethargy. Let's understand that when political interests get invested in such a manner that they start acting contrary to public interest, it's important to counter that particular inertia by enough stimulus and pressure applied on the government machinery. But moving on to the entire idea of Anna Hazare, they said Anna Hazare doesn't have accountability. this is beautiful. Because with the entire media of planet Earth after him and like looking into his bathroom through cameras and everything, he is the most accountable person within this particular country. Even more accountable than Sonia Gandhi, because even after Sonia Gandhi put the whole CBI behind Anna Hazare, they couldn't find anything on him, right? So we tell you that the leaders of these movements are more accountable than Sonia Gandhi, who was never investigated by the CBI for all the like activities of Robert Vadra, who was at the Snoop Dogg concert 3 days ago, right? In his Lamborghini. God knows where he got that from. I guess we all know. But I'm moving on to this entire idea, right? Finally. Then they come out and say this is really, really beautiful. They say that Anna Hazare compromised other legitimate movements. Wait, did you just say there are other legitimate movements? Because that in fact is a concession to the fact that there are legitimate movements, and we have a plurality of movements from Baba Ramdev to Anna Hazare to 20 other leaders who will crop up in the future and lead their own movements against the state every time a state turns tyrannical. Civil disobedience movement has ensured that the democracy in our particular country has remained within check. It's not anti-democratic, it is an essential check on democracy. It has prevented all kinds of tyrannies. It has prevented the tyranny of the majority, as happens in many other democracies where the masses just decide to persecute the minorities, as has happened in Bangladesh and Pakistan. It has prevented that from happening because of the fact that a small minority of people can come out and amplify their voice through a civil disobedient movement. It has prevented the tyranny of a democratically elected government when it can choose as a mass. They all come together, collude and realize that we can make so much more money by being in agreement of the fact that not passing a Lokpal bill will make us richer. And since none of us are pursuing that as an agenda, the people will be forced to vote on other least common denominator issues and therefore supporting the people and giving them no option to back out of that. This is the option they've had. This is what has kept us from becoming a failed state, and that's why we think it has inherent value. Thank you so much.
ডিবেটটা দেখছো এক্সাইটমেন্ট রাহুল করতেছে আমার হেল্প করতেছে আপনি কি হয়েছে ক্যামেরা নেই তো রাহুল ক্যামেরা রাকিব ক্যামেরা দিস না কেন ও আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে
Can everyone hear me? You hear me? Yeah. Start. Ladies and gentlemen, when we debate and when we engage with each other, the most important thing to do is to engage in such a manner that doesn't force the other person to shut shop and ignore you. The problem with civil disobedience is not that it doesn't achieve the ends, because of course in a lot of situations it does. But the problem with civil disobedience is that there are just two options. You treat it as an impasse, you either give in or you ignore. And that is precisely what side government is against. That is precisely why we extol the value of democratic discourse and not that of civil disobedience. This debate is not about whether or not the means will lead to ends, but whether those means are absolutely necessary. Because if I want a Jan Lokpal, if I want everything in this country to be improved, I can kidnap Manmohan Singh's wife and hold him at ransom. But the idea is, do I really need to do it when an existing democratic structure enables me to do this? Now, side opposition's primary ground has been that the democratic structure doesn't work. Your vote doesn't count for anything. There's always a political impasse. These are things that side government has clashed with, and I'm going to elaborate on in this speech before I really get down to the voting questions involved here. So the first idea is that your vote counts for nothing. Now we don't know where Asha is going with this, because of your vote counts for nothing is an argument against democracy in general, and if you want us to give you an alternative, you give us an alternative to democracy. Show us which philosopher king you're going to put in place of that, and don't just tell us that your vote counts for nothing just as an assertion. We tell you that you might think your vote counts for nothing, and that is the pernicious effect that civil disobedience has had on you. Because when people vote and you don't see any sort of result happening, that's not because your vote doesn't count for anything. It's because of when the Jan Lokpal hasn't been enacted for 20 years, it's not because people's vote doesn't count for anything. It's because people haven't used their votes to get the Jan Lokpal. And we think that's important. The Jan Lokpal bill has never been a voting issue in this country. We think that is not the fault of some politician. It's not the fault of the bureaucrat. It's all of our faults, and we need to introspect and think about it. When we're talking about other legitimate movements, we meant legitimate movements because they don't engage in civil disobedience. They proceed the democratic way, and I'm going to talk more about that later, right? They talk about this idea of internal democracy and all of that, right? We tell you that these movements don't have internal democracy because you can opt in or opt out of Anna Hazare's movement. You can never talk to Anna Hazare and tell him, don't be so brash, give the government some time, let them look at other Lokpal bills. Other Lokpal bills like the one that Aruna Roy drafted, which was significantly better in the way that it allocated powers to certain officers who would be elected as Lokpals under the Jan Lokpal bill, as opposed to Anna's, which was drafted by Prashant Bhushan, and we know what, no relation by the way, who we know has absolutely no legal acumen whatsoever, right? So let's look at what the important questions in this debate are, right? Why is focus on the demagogue bad, right? So we think that the idea is that when you put an undue amount of focus on this demagogue, you take away from what the movement is really about, right? That's when, and by the way, in the gang rape thing, Asaram Bapu and Baba Ramdev were telling people to go protest, right? Nobody was asking them to introspect and look at what the real issues were. They said, let's demand chemical castration, right? Even if you give in, chemical castration is not going to solve the problem of rape. The problem of rape happens because of a number of reasons. It's because of a cultural conflict, because of urban to rural or rural to urban migration. It's about a clash of Eastern and Western cultures. It's about not respecting women enough and segregation in schools. Chemical castration as a quick fix is not going to do anything, and you're going to have people out on the streets again. You're going to have people's days disturbed again. You're going to have people in ambulances not getting to the hospital in time again. And you're going to have another lathi charge because you are promoting a political impasse and then saying, oh look, there's a political impasse, I can't do anything, let me go and riot because that's the only way out. That is the attitudinal harm that we're talking about, where people devalue the democratic system. Now we think it's legitimate when Gandhi did it, right? Because he wasn't just protesting one salt law. What he's symbolically doing was showing that this is a system where my voice cannot be heard, where regardless of what I say, the colonial rule is not going to do anything. We tell you, under the existing system does accommodate for protest. We have the Jantar Mantar where people can go and protest, where people can air their views. We have parliamentary committees where people discuss these issues, where experts are called, right? But these demagogues are going to say, look at Baba Ramdev, listen to Baba Ramdev and Asaram Bapu on rape. Don't listen to Mrinal Satish. What has he done? He's just gone to Yale. He's done years of research and collated a lot of information from the Supreme Court of India, showing how what kind of judicial attitudes we have towards rape, right? Don't listen to Mrinal Satish. Don't listen to Aruna Roy, who's actually debating things with the parliament, trying to come to compromises and allowing a democratic process to flourish, right? We tell you that is why a democratic structure is better, because it allows for a middle path, the choice, and people aren't alienated like Ashay into thinking that I can either passively sit back and let a corrupt government rule me, or I can become an anarchist. People can use their votes if they really want to, and we tell you that is what is important in this debate. We don't have to, it's not our burden to show you that people will somehow start using their votes and all of that, right? Our burden is simply to tell you that there is another way out, and that civil disobedience is simply going to promote these negative attitudes of the state being bad and of anarchy being glorified when anarchy is not necessary. And we think that is where we're really winning this debate.
Before that, sir.
Go ahead.
Sir, did the fact that Mahatma Gandhi was an Anglophile take away from the legitimacy or the effectiveness of the movement that happened at that time that got us our independence?
I don't think he was an Anglophile. He didn't wear Western clothes. He walked around in like a dhoti. So I don't know what you're really getting at with that, right? But what Asha is, okay fine, I do get what he's getting at. It just took a couple of seconds. What he's getting at is whether the personal habits of an individual affect the movement, right? He's talking about stuff like, and let me add to that POI, it's about like whether or not Gandhi slept between two naked women undermined his movement, right? The idea is that when we're looking at the movement, we need to look at why that person is protesting it. Gandhi could have gotten a lot, right? Gandhi gets, right? Gandhi got a lot, unlike Baba, right? But the important thing here is that Gandhi didn't really have this idea of promoting this movement just because he wanted to have this demagogic status, right? Gandhi was trying to protest a structure which could not have been improved internally in any way. And the difference being that in the present situation, people can use their votes, people can introspect, people need, and we think that's really what this country needs at this time, right? This sort of moral awakening. Because you can't constantly get away by saying, oh, Nitin Gadkari has so much black money, Robert Vadra has so much black money, when you yourself are okay with corruption. Because corruption starts at home. Corruption is something that is endemic to Indian society, to the Indian consciousness. And we think until that is addressed, blaming these people people is not going to solve anything at all, right? We tell you that these movements blame the wrong persons completely. They blame political parties, they blame institutions, and they take the focus away from the self. There has been no civil disobedience movement of late that I know of, where people have been told to introspect, where people have been told that you should respect women and not you should have harsher restraints, have chemical castration and all of that, right? So we think that is highly problematic in this debate, right? Baba solution. Don't pay taxes, right? And here we heard a lot of Baba words that, oh, you won't be able to pay the police officer to beat you up. You also won't be able to pay for the road for development. You also won't be able to pay for hospital subsidies. You won't be able to pay for farmer subsidies and all of that as well, right? So and that's exactly why civil disobedience is bad, because it leads to situations of collateral harm, and they have not told us why that collateral harm is justified. They have simply proceeded on this presumption of a political impasse. We tell you that in a democracy, a political impasse never exists. If you look at Nepal, yesterday's Maoist is today a politician. If you look at the Northeast, yesterday's revolutionaries are today's politicians. Democracy is inclusive. Civil disobedience tells you that anarchy is the only way out. It leads you to a situation where you will never, ever respect democracy, and then we're going to have Ashay and Baba as our new philosopher kings. I don't need to tell you why that's going to be bad. We will get to it.
আপু রেডি ঘুমাইতেছে আপু রেডি ঘুমাইতেছে
Okay, so it is disturbing that Amber knows how much Baba gets and how much he doesn't. Clearly, he hero worships him. So, as we have established that, I think what's more important here is that the only response to this taxes argument came in this boy's speech, and he says that hospitals, roads, and all of this will not be built. The problem is the funds allocated for hospital subsidies, roads, etc., are currently not being used for what they ought to have been used for. It's anyway being swindled, and that is why the people of India are standing up against this. And that is the purpose of this civil disobedience. Because what they seem to characterize the government as to be is something that if you keep, it's like flogging a dead horse, right? The democracy, the entire democratic process has failed us. It's not like just because a peasant the vote that a peasant casted didn't work, and that's why and therefore he's okay with corruption because the government that he voted in is currently corrupt, right? Everyone has a problem with corruption. So the first question you ought to ask yourselves is, what is the purpose of civil disobedience? Is it to instill some conscience in some introspection argument that they told you? Is it to enact a particular law? Because there are two people standing with a banner saying have a public flogging of the rapists. Is it to do that, or is it merely to initiate governmental action, initiate the democratic process that has failed us? Because we are at a junction where the democratic process is being. So you have two options. It's failing us. You either keep voting in these governments. It's not like there are good parties that are waiting to be voted in, but unfortunately are not being voted in because people are not going to vote. That's ridiculous. What's happening is there is a governmental machinery that's very conducive for leaders to misappropriate, and therefore, irrespective of who there is, they're met with a huge incentive to swindle and launder money, because there are no checks and mechanisms, and that is the problem. And since that has happened, the question, sit. And since that has happened, what do? Do you trust the government? And I can't believe I'm facing teams that saying, oh, trust the government, trust the machinery. I've said this, but trusting the government is like letting a cannibal give you a blowjob, okay? You don't know when it's a sausage. And seriously, and that's the problem. Because when do you draw the line when the government is continuously not responding to a threat? What do you do now? Right? You keep voting in government, you keep going to or do you initiate action and you disobey laws, like the laws against homosexuality? Do you disobey them publicly, forcing the government to consider this issue, forcing the issue to get into a court of law, and forcing the judges to acknowledge the fact that there's a large, widespread public disobedience against this law, and therefore at least effect that change in law to the extent possible? And we think that is a better solution than continuously going to courts, keep voting in governments that are going to be corrupt anyway, right? Because we have seen in 60 years that no government has ever been voted in and not fallen into the trap of corruption.
So,
or at least in a state like India where it's so bureaucratic that all the checks and mechanisms are within the control of the government, and that is the problem that we are facing today, right? And so we tell you that the purpose of the movement is merely to initiate discussion, merely to initiate a legislative intent to deal with the problem. Because even if I want chemical castration, or I want to cut him into 8 pieces and feed him to like dogs from 12 different states, whatever I want to do, if we all have different solutions to the same problem, we at least want the government to consider 1, 2, 3 or 4 of our solutions. And this needs to be debated in the parliament. It's not like if I want chemical castration, I'm holding a board saying I want chemical castration, government is going to take that and make it a bill, right? It's still going to go into the democratic process. It's an act to initiate democratic process. It's still going to go into the parliament. There's going to be debates on it by people who are capable of doing this. And we don't think that a Mrinal Satish is capable of moving masses to such a degree that the government is pressurized. Sure, he makes good arguments, whatever. So, but the point is that we think that the capabilities of individuals who can move people because of emotions are far greater than capabilities of people who can move because of whatever, good argumentation. Okay, so we think that playing on the emotional aspect, because every peasant, everybody who went to India Gate has suffered an act of corruption. They told you they don't know knowledge of the movement, they don't know what the bill says. We say it's okay if they don't know, as long as they're united by a common purpose to solve the problem of corruption. We think that is sufficient standing for them to be there in that movement. Yes, what is it?
All the people protesting at Ramlila Maidan disappeared. Can you tell us how many of them came back subsequently to protest on reforms that are actually relevant?
Okay, it's that, no, we think that the democratic process was instantly initiated the minute the Ramlila Maidan incident happened. We think that the government is, in fact, the parliament is currently in cognizance of this problem. It's a national issue. The government is pressurized to discuss this in the parliament, and that's all the purpose of this should be. Because what they seem to suggest is that there's a spectrum. So you can either be a peaceful protester, go by whatever the go by the democratic mandate, or you can be violent and do what the Maoists are doing. Okay, both of these we have seen have large, overwhelming disadvantages to people, and we tell you there's a midway, there's civil disobedience, where you disobey laws that are clearly tyrannical and clearly meet no purpose. And if you start disobeying laws, the inherent value we told you in disobeying laws is that the state enacts laws in the first place in order to regulate the society and ensure compliance. If you start disobeying that, the state is forced to meet with the consequences of disobeying a law. And not only it has to do, and we think that the state would rather address the problem with the initiation of the democratic process than deal with the consequences of things like not paying taxes or things like walking into India Gate and protesting, right? Because they know that people, there are whatever ambulances that can't pass, so they know that this is a huge problem for people who want to commute, and they will be forced to address this. And we think that is what we need these movements to do, because all that the movements should serve is to initiate the democratic process, which they seem to suggest will get initiated on the 11th or the 12th time, but in 60 years we have seen that it hasn't worked, and the only time change has been effected by the government is when huge pressure internally has been put on it. Yes, sir.
People in Uttar Pradesh have voted multiple times on the basis of their naming Yadav or Ram. How many times have people in Uttar Pradesh voted on issues of corruption or on issues of rape?
Okay, because we think that people are not the persons who should vote on issues of corruption. People are not the people. Oh, please. Okay, before you start taking your shirts off, listen. Okay, we think it's not people ought not to vote on this, because you're electing parliamentarians to vote on this issue and how this ought to be addressed. So it's not like people ought to suggest a solution and come up with the bill or law to solve this, right? And we think that as long as the people are compelling the parliamentarians to do what they're supposed to be doing, the purpose of the movement has been achieved. And we think that between violence and peaceful protest and civil disobedience, we think civil disobedience is the most effective solution. Principally, also we believe that it hurts the least number of people. It hurts where it hurts the most, which is the government and the government machinery. Neither there is property getting destroyed, neither there are people dying which happen as a result of violence, or neither is the government just sitting on its in the comfort of knowing that people are always going to engage with the democratic process to effect change, and that we will never have to address this problem, or we will never have a situation where we will have to deal with a law and order problem, or a problem where we can't tomorrow cater to the needs of the people. We need to put them in a difficult situation, and we need to make it a Sophie's choice, so to speak, for them if they want this, because it's a choice. If you force the government, they either have to use force, violence on its people, or they have to address the problem. Either way, we think, and we don't think the government is, and if the government uses force, then it's clearly a government that doesn't deserve to be in power, and we think that a responsible government ought to address the problem in the first place. So that's the problem.
মাঝখানে লস্ট হয়ে গেছে মিস্টেকটা লাস্ট
Is everyone ready?
লস্ট হয়ে গেছে
All the judges, you guys ready?
বুঝছো আন্দোলন হয়ে গেছে
Mr. Speaker, the big problem with that side of the house is that, first of all, they're living in a deluded reality. Okay, their version of reality has nothing to do with what is true in the ground level, and their entire case is based on assertions about and false assertions about things that they seem to know. So they seem to think that the democratic system is fine, that they know everything about the private lives of Anna Hazare, Baba Ramdev, Gandhiji, and even myself apparently. So this is the problem. Like, their entire case is based on these kind of assertions. So first question, is there a problem with status quo in this debate? We told you everything that has been happening, right? We told you that about corruption. We told you about graft scams. We told you about the fact that laws are not implemented. We told you about corrupt politicians. We told you about corrupt political parties. We told you there's a nexus between parties where both parties are refusing to do anything in order to solve any of the problems, thereby rendering the political process meaningless. They didn't manage to contest any of this. Like, it's not that they denied that this was the structure. They just decided to choose, they chose very arrogantly to push the blame onto other parties. So let's answer the first question with a resounding yes. Yes, there is a problem. No rational person can deny that there's a problem currently. So is their democratic process a solution to that problem? No, let's look at what's happened as a result of their democratic process. First of all, half the people have been disaffected by their democratic process, leading to things like Maoist rebellions and violence, and like entire areas of India being like completely destitute areas where there is no law in operation because like warlords and Maoists and Naxalites are in power. And these are like vital mineral-rich areas, ladies and gentlemen. People are dying as a result of this. So it is a problem. Secondly, people are starving on the streets, and like people are starving on the streets of India. People are starving in farms in rural areas. Okay, and they're doing nothing about this whatsoever, ladies and gentlemen. And they haven't solved any of this, ladies and gentlemen. So this is another huge problem with what they are suggesting, ladies and gentlemen. They are not suggesting any kind of solution. Right now, let's look at what they're blaming this, and this is magnificent. Okay, they decide to place the blame on this on everybody who's protesting about the problem. Okay, so what do they say? They first assert, and with no basis, no knowledge, nothing, that these people aren't going to vote. First of all, I don't know how they know this. Second of all, they claim that it's their fault because they did not introspect. Okay, this is the most ridiculous thing I've heard. It's not the peasants' fault, it's not the farmers' fault, and it's not the women of Delhi's fault that people are committing rapes, that people are indulging in corruption, and that all of these problems are there. Guess whose fault it is? It's the politicians they're protesting against, ladies and gentlemen. So it's absolutely unbelievable that they're choosing to place the blame on people who are complaining about the problem rather than the ones who are causing the problem. Okay, and then they say the problem is the demagoguery of Anna Hazare because he brought this problem to light. I'll ask you a few simple questions. Was the Lokpal bill considered and discussed more or less seriously after he brought it to light? Was rape and related topics discussed more or less after the Delhi gang rape protest? Why is it that Minal Satish came on Times Now at all? Because this was made an issue by protests, right? So this is all proof of what we're saying, which is that civil disobedience brings these matters to light. Now let's look at what else we did. We gave you an actual solution to these problems, right? We proposed a particular idea of refusing to pay taxes. For the half of this debate, they didn't engage with it at all, right? Their only response was in the last minute of their whip speech, okay? And he gives you one throwaway line in that, which is that if you don't collect tax, you won't have roads either. This is completely misguided because the government is using this fear, first of all, to corral these people and to misappropriate money from them, right? And even this tax money that is paid is misused in a variety of ways. We all know what percentages of money that are supposed to go to these kinds of schemes actually end up there, and it's a very low percentage, Mr. Speaker. Ultimately, what are they saying in this round? They're saying solve the process, respect the process, trust the process, though it hasn't worked. They're saying that is the fault of the people. They're saying that they voted for people called Yadav and they voted for people called Ram, and that's the problem. The point is, it's not the political process is being hijacked by these people. It's not like there's some Ambar Bhushan and Kartik Sivaram standing in opposition who are going to not be demagogues, who are going to be nice people, who are not going to sleep with other people between them, and who are going to solve all the problems of India. That's not the reality. The reality is everybody is doing this. That's why people need to solve these problems themselves. That works, that brings matters to light, and we are very, very proud. Topo.
Clarity. তুই তো পুরো ইমপ্রেসড হয়ে গেছিস। তুই তো পুরো ইমপ্রেসড হয়ে গেছিস। ওইসব একটু বুঝতেছেন? হুম? তুই পিছলে গান গেতেছিস কেমনে করে?
Right? Mr. Speaker, it's easy to push it, and Baba's doing exactly this, that anarchy is justified when democracy fails. But he doesn't get, amongst other things, whether it will work in the longer run and how it's sustainable and how it's good for the democratic structure we have. He tried in BD's speech to tell him that this will make the politicians vote, but then BD kind of like shot himself in the foot when they said that people shouldn't be voting on the issues, that they should come up by it themselves. They never talked about how these reforms in the longer run will work in a sustainable fashion. As much as we didn't point out how the alternative, but we did that much better, how the alternative is much more approachable in this case. What did they say? They said that the state is bad, the state is swindling your money, they're allowing your women to be raped. So what do? Disobey laws, distance yourself from the state, and don't do anything about it other than going to Ram Leela Maidan, so on and so forth. And we say this is the exact sentiment which is harmful for democracy and harmful for other seeking solutions in the future, and that's why we don't think it's sustainable. It might be right now, but if for example, for a different objective, if it was achieved, we don't think it's sustainable. We don't think you can have a peaceful and harmonious country in the longer extent. We said this for two main reasons, two main characteristics of these movements, which we elicited through examples. The characteristic of demagoguery, the characteristic of lack of introspection, and the characteristic of slacktivism as three reasons why they'll hurt democracy in the longer run and why they're bad. No response to most of those. What did they say to the idea of demagoguery? They said that, we said they're unaccountable, but no, they're accountable because there's a camera in Anna Hazare's toilet. That might be true, but we still don't have a camera which tells us why Anna Hazare thinks that the Lokpal bill is bad, or how he's come to such a conclusion. There's no talk about whether Anna Hazare is a smart person, which he's not, or whether he's qualified to talk about this, and whether his opinion is something that must not be discussed or followed. There's no talk about discourse and debate about these issues. It's only belief in the sagacity of the man because he wears a cap, because he wears a Gandhi cap and calls himself a Gandhian, and he goes on hunger strikes. Moreover, we say this appealing to demagoguery allows Anna Hazare to make blanket demands of the government, which we think is bad in the long run, without any engagement. Imagine this, but for a different, unfair objective. If the leader did the same thing, if we promoted this culture, we would elicit for the same thing. Because if Anna Hazare demanded something else, because we know Anna Hazare is good because he's against corruption, and that's all they know. This nicely moves on to my point of lack of introspection. And Ashay really made this point for me when he said that I went there, I achieved martyrdom by going there and getting beaten by the cops, but he never responded to any of our arguments about the socially ingrained nature of the problem, because he doesn't know. Because when you go there and achieve martyrdom, you've already done what is to be done about the issue. You don't need to educate yourself, you don't need to introspect, you don't need to change the system, because why? You got beaten by the cops, which makes the state bad, and the state is bad, so oppose them. We think this is critical, and I pointed this out, and there's no rebuttal to this. Because this is taking away the middle class who can really change the system because they're educated, and all they're doing is liking things on Facebook and retweeting tweets about Anna Hazare and going to Ramleela ground without voting. Why do we know they won't vote? Because Anna Hazare doesn't want them to vote. He's not asking them to vote or make any political change, just the way he orphaned Arvind Kejriwal as soon as it achieved political objectives because politicians are bad. We're not saying the alternative is easier. We're not saying we can achieve it. We agree that it's harder. We agree that civil disobedience is easier in the shorter run. But we say using democratic procedures is sustainable and better for a democracy in the long run.